Good afternoon, Energy Media readers. Today we're going to talk about another controversial energy story coming out of Alberta, and that is the $100 million that the Alberta government has committed to cleaning up orphan gas wells. It's about 1,000 of them, I think, is the target. And to discuss that, we're going to welcome Regan Boychuk, and welcome to the interview.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Regan, just before I give you the first question, remind me the organization that you're with.
I'm the founder of Reclaim Alberta that works on developing a solution to this problem of unfunded oil field cleanup. And then Reclaim Alberta is also part of the coalition that makes up the Alberta Liabilities Disclosure Project that has been doing a lot of work trying to quantify this problem.
Yeah, that's an important point, because even though we've got this specific issue today, there is a much bigger problem of unfunded liabilities within the oil and gas industry that we can talk about in another interview. So give me your reaction to the government's announcement.
It wasn't terribly surprising. The Orphan Well Association for the last few years has been operating on a $235 million interest-free public loan. So their activities have dramatically ramped up. In the last 3 years, they've probably cleaned up as much as they did over the previous 20. But that money's running out. And lending money doesn't increase cleanup. It simply pulls future cleanup ahead. So the Orphan Well Association would have done the same amount of cleanup over the next decade without the loan, but the loan allowed them to pull a decade's work into the first 3 years, and that's what we've enjoyed. But they're about to go into repayment mode. And so they were going to be cleaning up even less than they did before the loan, spending the next 7 years repaying that loan. And so next year, their activities are going to wind down, but the problem isn't going away. So not surprisingly, Kenny extended that by another year, give them 1 year to spend another $100 million to keep up this pace they've got up to over the last couple of years.
Now, explain to me how that those loans will be repaid.
They're budgeted into the levy that is charged to industry by the Orphan Well Association. And so they're paying it back over 10 years. So that principal divided up over 10 years, 1/10 from every annual levy goes towards repaying that. And what remains can go towards more cleanup.
Now, the problem, of course, is that the number of orphan wells continues to grow. And we see that because the increasing numbers of small companies that are failing. And the work that I've done on the junior sector shows that they're in a capital crisis, and their numbers continue to drop. It appears that if, another tough year, and we're going to see more of them fail, and that presumably will throw more orphan wells onto the OWAs. Is that what you expect?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually, I've been absolutely astounded at how few companies have gone bankrupt in recent years. Last year, after the Redwater decision, which should have been a big problem for industry, there were only 14 oil and gas bankruptcies last year. That's no more than the year before. And so I've been expecting more bankruptcies for a long time, but banks have been extending goodwill, and these companies have been allowed to continue operating by the good graces of their bankers. But it's incredibly tough. We need stuff cleaned up. They don't have access to capital. So somewhat counterintuitively, it's a relatively good idea to lend this money. 100 million sounds like a big number, but only if they don't pay it back. The actual cost to the province for the interest cost of lending that money is in the range of $13 million. So for the bargain basement price of $13 million, we can get 1,000 wells cleaned up by leveraging the OWA.
Now, I want to get your opinion on a story that is a bit troubling, and that is larger profitable companies unloading their liabilities onto smaller, less financially viable companies, which then eventually go broke, and then those liabilities have to get assumed by the OWA. What's your take on that?
That is absolutely standard operating procedure in Alberta for the last 30 years. Ever since 1991 was the first time cleanup had to go on your balance sheet on the liability side. And it was the first time that the court said, you have to clean up, even in bankruptcy, it comes before secured creditors. From that moment, industry did the rational thing. They sold off old and depleted wells to smaller companies. They depleted them further. They sell them off to a smaller company. It's been perfectly understood by regulators for 30 years. Nothing has ever been done to stop it. There's been a couple of efforts over the last 30 years. They're quickly quashed by industry. In the mid-90s, there was a program. It was canceled. In 2000, there was new legislation that you weren't allowed to transfer inactive wells anymore. If you depleted it, it was stuck with you and it's going to stay on your books. You're going to have to clean it up. That was killed within months by industry. And so for 30 years, we've watched this. We've watched these liabilities go to smaller and smaller companies by design. It's a rational, economists understand it very well. It's called the judgment proof problem. You put dangerous activities into a small corporation that doesn't have the resources. If you poison a river, people get sick. There's only 4 guys in a van at the company that did it. So you can't get the money out of them. So it's a rational strategy that industry has pursued for decades, and regulators have watched it happen the whole time.
Sounds like the industry strategy is rational, but the regulator strategy and policy around it is not protecting the public interest, which presumably would be a rational approach.
You would think so at the start, but criminologists and economists understand that at a certain point, when an industry is facing a systemic crisis, like what oil and gas in Alberta is facing in recent years outside of the oil sands, it's dire straits. A systemic crisis creates a dilemma for the regulators. They can either face the facts and tell the truth about how big the problem is and all the painful things they're going to do, can be required to solve this problem that's been growing for decades. It's not their fault. They inherited it, and so they want to avoid it. And so the regulator's incentive, after a certain point, when things get so bad, the regulator's incentive becomes keep it under the rug, delay it until the next election for politicians, until I can retire for regulators. Nobody wants it to happen on their watch. And so they aren't serving the public interest like we assume they are, but they are also operating rationally. And we should recognize that and make the necessary corrections to such a broken system.
Regan, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate it. And this is clearly a growing problem. It's not going to go away. I look forward to chatting with you in the future, and we can explore this issue more.
Look forward to it. Take care.